at the outset, I wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to deliver this talk on career in neuropsychology. A very good morning to all the participants, the torchbearers of tomorrow. And psychology has become such an important thing, especially in times of pandemic, where everybody is having some kind of a mental health issue or the other. And I think the need of your services is required even for the years to come. In fact, one of the undersecretary of the ministry had called it as a scar, individuals with COVID scar. She termed it. I thought that was very, very important. So we are going to see many, many youngsters in all from the developmental to adults to geriatric. We will see a lot of mental health issues, and I think this is the right time to choose this field and to develop this field and take it forward. Thank you all. Just give me a minute. I'll just share the slides. Are my slides visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah. When the organizers asked me to speak about neuropsychology, I know many of you have heard about neuropsychology. And in clinical psychology, this is one of the most difficult subjects. Unless you understand what is the brain, what is its function, what is its structure, it may not be able to, one may not be able to understand what is its implication in an individual's life. So the overview that I'm going to give you is, I will very briefly speak about introduction to neuropsychology, and you should know the history of neuropsychology and why a trained clinical psychologist should do this neuropsychology. What are the brain structures? I have a small video which will convey, because I don't want you to get overwhelmed. It is a doable subject. If you put in the effort and understand it in the right manner. What is the role of a neuropsychologist? What is neuropsychological assessment? How to become a neuropsychologist? Lastly, what are the career options in neuropsychology? And then summary. I'm sure all of you will agree with me. The most important aspect in a human is its brain. And it's mysterious, it is very complicated, and very astonishing organ. The more you know about the brain, the more you don't know. And it is also called the master organ because it regulates all the aspects of your body. So I think it is one of the most important aspects in the human body. So if you look at what is neuropsychology, it is a specialized field within the field of clinical psychology. What it does is, it is completely dedicated to the understanding of the relations between brain and behavior. I'll come to brain and behavior, what is brain and behavior in the later slides. And specifically, these relations can be applied to how to diagnose a brain disorder from the neuropsychological perspective, how to carry out assessments, and what are the behavioral functions as a result of these deficits in this cognition, and how to overcome all these deficits by the neuropsychological rehabilitation or effective treatment that you give to the individual. It also deals with understanding, carrying out assessment and treatment of these behaviors, which is directly or indirectly related to brain. So here I would like to say, yes, we are looking at the brain dysfunction due to an injury or an illness. But there is also another component called the innate. What are you equipped with? So we also have to unravel those aspects and see how we can combine the nature and the nurture and help the individual overcome their deficits. Its contemporary definition is strongly influenced by two traditions. One is experimental, which came very much later, and the theoretical investigation of brain research in various other cognitive neuroscience, neurology, neurosurgery, psychiatry, psychodynamics. These are some of the aspects which contributed to neuropsychology in a great way. So the first hypothesis was the brain hypothesis. What it said is brain is a source of behavior. There was another, these aspects were refuted. They said not only how, then what is the role of an environment? So then came the combination of brain, behavior, and the environment. Then came the neuron hypothesis. The neuron hypothesis speaks about every unit in the brain structure function is the neuron. So if you look at it, it's very scientific. We as psychologists, we always think of probably this could be the reason. There is an underlying factor. We are not very sure what is a contributing factor. Unlike all other psychology subjects, neuropsychology is very scientific, and it is there or not there. There is nothing like underlying, or it is probably this is what it is. No, it is present or absent. In that sense, it is very, very scientific. So we'll go on to the introduction. As I told you, it is a specialty in clinical psychology. So the competencies in what an individual have to be equipped with this competency in assessment, consultation, and intervention. The core knowledge domains include basic neuroscience, basic cognitive neuroscience. You have to know about the functional neuroanatomy of the brain in order to know better your neuropsychology. And what is a neuropathology? Then you go on to clinical neuropsychological assessment, where you have to be well versed, supervised training is required, and then all the other psychological interventions. See, I would not separate clinical psychology and neuropsychology different. I would like to integrate. As a clinical psychologist, I'm looking at this particular problem in this manner. And how do I overcome by carrying out neuropsychological assessment, or integrate neuropsychology and clinical psychology together? These are some things that one should look into and integrate whenever you find there is a problem. So if you look at the branches of neuropsychology, clinical neuropsychology is the most practiced by the clinicians. It deals with patients who have any kind of an injury or a lesion in the brain. So what clinical neuropsychologists do is carry out assessment to understand intelligence, personality, their sensory motor functions, and predominantly this is carried out by using the testing, the test that is available, which is standardized and which is chosen to address a particular function. Then it is definitely a scientific endeavor which studies brain behavior relationship and helps the clinician in confirming the diagnosis. And as a clinical neuropsychologist, you are involved in rehabilitating such individuals. Behavioral neurology is another branch where they look at, in fact, mostly behavioral neurologists are a medical background people. What they look at is they emphasize it upon conceptual rather than operational definition of behavior. We get into the operational definition of behavior. So then they look at the individual cases rather than the group statistics, and their focus and their approach usually involves less formal testing. It is more of their behavioral observation and whether it is normal or they are deviating from normal. So studies in behavioral neurology may often sample broader aspects of behavior than usually which a clinical neuropsychologist does. Then the next is the experimental psychologist. As I already told you, that this experimental neuropsychology came much, much later, before the clinical neuropsychology, because patients were seen during the World War I and II itself. They started seeing patients because they had some cognitive issues and behavioral issues. Experimental psychologists came much later to understand what is normal and what is not normal. So predominantly experimental neuropsychologists focus their study on normal individual. So the word neuropsychology, a little bit about the history I will go on. First, I will tell you what neuropsychology. The first time the term neuropsychology was used by Sir William Osler in 1913. Then in 1936, it entered into the nomenclature of clinical psychology by Carl Lashley. And in 1949, Donald Hebb wrote in his book, The Organization of Behavior, the neuropsychological theory. So he combined psychology with neuro and said it is neuropsychology. Then in 1957, the term was recognized. There was a designation of a subfield of neuroscience by Kluwer, and then he also suggested a book which would interest many neuropsychologists, and I would suggest all of you read this book, where it gives you a lot of understanding of how clinical neuropsychology is useful in clinical neuropsychology. So in 1960, the term got widely publicized by Carl Lashley's work, and you should read Carl Lashley's work also. Then if you look at the history, it started off in 3000 and 1700 BC itself, where discussion of localization, for example, if I look at a pen, which is the area that is getting mediated in my brain, that is what they looked at one-to-one relationship. So in second century BC, Galen, he said mind was located in the brain. In 19th century, damage of the cortical areas was related to the function that was impaired, and certain adaptive behaviors were noticed. In 1830, Gall's, if you look at any of these neuropsychology books, you will see a brain divided into different sections and all kind of functions would be written. That is the Gall. He localized each of this function to one particular part of the brain. So this is how Gall's work went on. And then the most important work was Broca's work. In 1861, the impetus of neuropsychology went leaps and bounds after Paul Broca brought out saying that this is the language area which mediates language function in the brain, especially in the front part of the brain. Since it is all UGPG, I'm really not going into the structure. Don't get overwhelmed because these are all doable. So I'll just talk about very briefly, very simple. I'll just put it across. So what Paul Broca did was, he went into presented a work of, he's a neurosurgeon. He presented a paper on in an international conference, where he said, this is the part of the brain which mediates language. He was ostracized, he was refuted, he went into dark for some time, for almost 8 years. He collected some more cases, almost 8 cases of stroke, and in the same conference, he presented this and demonstrated how the area in the left side of the front of the brain, the language is important. He was accepted, and that is when the study of neuropsychology took the impetus. The other aspect which contributed largely to neuropsychology was the World War I and II. There were war veterans who had injury to their brain, and after which they couldn't remember, or their personality was different, or they had behavior problems. So the scientists realized that brain is an important area which mediates all these functions, and a lot of research began after the World War I and II, and contributed in a great way to neuropsychology. So if you look at some of the names, there were Tubal, Luria, Zangwill, Lashley, Broca, all these people, Wernicke, all these people contributed in a great way to neuropsychology. Some of the brain components, these are the major components. There is a cerebral cortex, there is a basal nuclei, thalamus, there is hippocampus, there is cerebellum, there is brainstem. Again, don't get overwhelmed. I will just, to make it very simple, I'm going to play a video for you all, which is about 3 minutes. So there are other brainstem, there is hypothalamus. So what are these functions? So if you look at the cerebral cortex, the function is sensory perception, language, personality traits, and it involves in a lot of executive functions, thinking, decision-making, organization, etc. Basal nuclei, it is inhibition of your muscle tone, coordination of the movements, and suppression of the useless pattern of movement. Thalamus is the relay station of the brain. It is crude awareness of sensation, and hypothalamus regulates the homeostasis, such as functions like temperature control, thirst, hunger, etc. Cerebellum maintains balance, enhances the muscle tone, and coordinates and plans the skilled voluntary movement. If you look at the brainstem, it involves in a lot of cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive control. So can I request the organizer to play that video, please? Can I request the organizers to play the video?
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah. You just have a look at this video. It gives a very beautiful, it's a song. It's a 3-minute song, but conveys so beautifully the different parts of the brain and what is its function. Can I try otherwise?
Ma'am, I'm sharing.
Shall I try?
Yeah, you can try, ma'am.
See, I'm really not tech savvy like this.
Okay, ma'am. Let me show you.
That is my, I'm able to. Yeah. You're playing? Are you playing or am I playing?
Yes, ma'am.
This is a song about part of the brain. I'm singing it to memorize the name. The ideas here may be simplistic, but matching meaning and rhyme is a tough logistic. The cerebral cortex has 4 main lobes, with names from the nearby skull bones. Frontal does the thinking, occipital deals with vision, parietal senses objects, and temporal listens. Inside these lobes there's specialties, like Broca's area, which produces speech. Wernicke's area handles language comprehension, and the motor cortex is for moving with intention. Sensory cortex handles perception of touch, pain, temperature, and proprioception. There's 2 outer brain parts that are distinct. They seem separate, but everything is linked. The cerebellum does balance and coordination, and it has our memorized movement archive. The brainstem sets heartbeat and respiration and other things we need to survive. The brain's inner parts are unique. Cut the corpus callosum to take a peek. The thalamus handles signal routing. And the amygdala's emotions can have you shouting. The hippocampus does our long-term memory saving, and the hypothalamus makes our sex and food cravings. The anterior cingulate cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex learns from mistakes, and in controlling movement, the basal ganglia is the brakes. The brain parts list is much longer indeed, but for my class assignment, this is all I need.
Well, this is an overview of, a very crude way of looking into the brain structure, its function. Well, there are, as the song ends with that there is a lot more functions, and if one is interested, they can pursue and understand more about the brain and its functions. Okay, now I'll go on. So if you now, what is neuropsychology? If you look at the current definition, it says it's a molecular and physiological basis of behavior, which involves the study of brain and neuron function. So it has gone down to that molecular level. So there is a structure, there is a function, and which is vice versa, where you understand. But please remember, like Gal said, each part of the brain is responsible for a function. That is not true. So true. If any function, there is a behavior, and if the structure is there, it is predominantly that particular structure, but mediated by other structures too, which is called the neural network. And we should understand that it also facilitates. For example, if attention is in the front part of the brain, attention is important for all other functions. I have another 10 minutes to go, so I'll quickly rush. So I looked up this Wikipedia, very beautifully says the brain has a capacity to store 5 times as much information as possible. So brain is if you look at what is brain, brain is an abode of mind. What is mind? Mind is an awareness component, which has both left and right hemisphere. And mind is also an awareness. Whatever you think, you report. And that is why humans are much, much different from the other species on this earth. So emotion is another component, which is a non-verbal, which is the right hemisphere, which is, when you talk, you also depict some kind of an emotion which is appropriate to that particular situation. So behavior is a drive state, a goal-directed, purposeful action, emotion and awareness. Now, carrying out neuropsychological assessment in this country is a challenge because border to border there is variation. There is cultural variation, there is language variation, there's food variation. So to carry out neuropsychological assessment, if you want to specialize, you also have to keep in mind a very important component of culture. Who is a clinical neuropsychologist? A clinical neuropsychologist is one who understands the psychological and behavioral methods to evaluate patients' emotional, cognition, and behavior, and look at the strengths and weaknesses and relate these findings to normal or abnormal central nervous system functioning. And what is important is they use the knowledge of assessment, in assessment, in diagnosis, and in treatment, and in rehabilitation of patient across the lifespan who has developmental, neurological, or medical, or psychiatric conditions. Today, all of us know that most of the psychiatric condition is brain-based. So as I told you, it is a study of brain. I'm emphasizing the study of brain and behavior in most of my slides. So it makes sense that yes, neuropsychology means it is a study of brain and behavior. So the knowledge has come from various sources, from classical localizationist neurology and modern methods of psychometry and psychiatry, and neurology. Many things we have understood. So it is, I would like to put it as it is an interface between psychology, neurology, psychiatry, cognitive neuroscience, and we have added basic neuroscience. Why basic neuroscience? because we are looking at the neurochemical changes, neurophysiological changes. All these are very, very important to understand neuropsychology. So the objective of clinical neuropsychology is to assess and diagnose disturbance of mentation and behavior and relate these findings to the neurological implication. So what is it? It is a scientific investigation of brain and behavior. It is a study of how people can think, act, react, and interact. It has implication in every facet of human life. Especially in this country, it utilizes both literacy and illiteracy. Many theories are generated from the innovative forms of investigation. It incorporates diverse as psychoanalysis and cognitive neuroscience together and brings about the understanding what this particular individual is going through. It is equipped to enhance understanding of brain behavior of basis of brain and human behavior basis of brain, and it is combined with many other disciplines to understand. So it also, how do you carry out? We have standardized tests. Even in this country, our institute has standardized 23 internationally used tests, which we can be administered on the individuals. So the test covers a gamut of things from intelligence to learning and memory. So what do you do as a role of clinical neuropsychologist is you carry out the assessment and help the neurologist and the general physicians or the neurosurgeons or the psychiatrists to establish the diagnosis. Earlier, when I did my neuropsychology, it was predominantly used for diagnosis because a lot of imaging techniques were not available. But today, the imaging techniques are there. But to establish and to substantiate the diagnosis, neuropsychology is very useful. It makes prediction regarding the prognosis of the recovery, intervention, and rehabilitation. And it also evaluates patients with mental disorders to help predict the course of the illness over a period of time and help tailor-make the strategies of intervention. So assessment, I'm not going to go into detail. There is a process because this itself is a class by itself. Rehabilitation is a class by itself. Neuroanatomy is a class by itself. I'm just giving glimpses of what is neuropsychology. So neuropsychological assessment, we completely rely on tests, but not to say that we don't look at their other aspects of their premorbid level of functioning or their personality or their interpersonal issues. We take into consideration everything. The goal is to establish characterized cognitive deficits. What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses? So why is this assessment important? It gives an objective evidence for the range of severity and the problems, and use these to, we compare it with the normative data, and we can also compare it across the labs. So assessment can establish the function that is preserved and that is, there is a deficit. So what do? We have to keep in mind, like the other assessments that you do in psychometry, all the initial data that you have to collect from starting from age to family history, all this is very, very important. And then the important thing in neuropsychological assessment before you start is to look at the behavioral observation with in the testing situation and outside the testing situation. What is the patient's behavior? And premorbid level of functioning is very, very important, and precise cognitive status across cognitive testing. There are many different types of how to assess. There is objective method, there is projective test, and there is individual test. So each one of it, you should be able to understand which one I have to administer on the patient. And then there are several domains which we need to address, even if it is, for example, the right side of the brain is, and in the back of the brain is injured, but we will do the entire neuropsychological assessment to understand because of the neural network. So we start from speed, we go on to attention, executive functions. Executive functions, what I mean is all this decision making, planning, organization, set shifting, personality, all this is, and then language, visual-spatial perception, learning and memory, and general intelligence. So what is the purpose of neuropsychological assessment? To determine and analyze individual difference in general intelligence, specific aptitude, educational achievement, vocational fitness, and non-intellectual personality traits. These are the purpose why I'm doing a neuropsychological assessment. What is the use? Uses to diagnose, localize, and cognitive capacity is important in any area that the patient is working or in activities of daily living. It is very, very important to facilitate rehabilitation, to look at how the recovery is taking place, whether it is static, whether it is deteriorating, or whether it is improving, and to identify unusual brain organizations of the patient, because brain is plastic. When there is an injury, the other parts of the brain is taking over. So to understand those organizations of the basic functions that you carry out, and disability assessment we give for occasional, occupational, and medico-legal cases. We also assist in what is known as the awake craniotomy or the awake surgery. When a patient is undergoing surgery, the neuropsychologist carries out the test in the operation theater to see what are the deficits persisting when the neurosurgeon is invading a particular structure. So, and to give evidence in the court. That is a very, very important, especially competency to stand trial, and in most of the head injury cases, because it is a road traffic accident, the patient has this particular cognitive deficits, behavioral deficits, emotional problems. So we go and give evidence. How to become a neuropsychologist according to the law of the land, the Mental Health Care Act 2007 very clearly delineates certain things. A person should complete MPhil in clinical psychology after your master's in clinical psychology in any of the RCI recognized institutions. Then you have to, after you complete your MPhil, to call yourself a neuropsychologist, you must complete your PhD in neuropsychology. Specialization, it's a specialized field. Or you can do a fellowship in neuropsychology, which NIMHANS is offering. We have every year 2 seats. So if it is 1-year course, anybody is interested after MPhil can apply for this course. And otherwise, you should have supervised training in neuropsychology for 3 to 5 years. So the supervisor gives you a certificate saying that you have been working under the supervision for 3 to 5 years in the population which needed the neuropsychological interventions or the assessment. Then career, and now this is very, very important. You can fit in yourself in any of the organizations, because cognition is important in every walk of human life. So you can be in colleges, you can be in universities, you can be in research centers, mental health clinic, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, forensic departments, rehabilitation centers, elderly homes, because today, dementia has been is affected many of our elderly individuals. So elderly homes are looking for neuropsychologists. IT companies, stress is playing an important role. Now, stress has a basis, it has a brain basis. So again, a neuropsychologist, and has an impact on cognition and emotion. So there they're looking at juvenile homes and prisons. There again, they're looking at what is the cognitive profile of an individual. Then you can also work directly with patients in a number of ways. That is, you can have a private practice, and even the looking at the scan, you can be doing the fMRI. Though the neuroradiologist does the MRI, you are assisting them in the fMRI, which is known as the functional magnet resonance imaging. So these are some of, so I would like to divide it into career basic and career in-depth. So career basic is, you are more a researcher, where you want to look at research in terms of how the injury and the illness is impacted, conduct assessment, and to determine how the patient's brain works. Diagnosis, you can do it. Neuropsychologists may also develop. If you look at the cognitive rehabilitation program, it is NIMHANS who has taken a lead in developing many of the tasks that we give for cognitive rehabilitation. So I don't see any reason why the youngsters in the crowd can take up and develop cognitive rehabilitation tasks for individual for a specific condition. And evaluating patients working with physician. See, the beauty of neuropsychology is such that you need to work in a multidisciplinary team. It can be a nurse, it can be the family members, it can be neurologists, neurosurgeons. More the multidisciplinary team, better it is. In fact, physiotherapists, occupation therapists, physiatrists, all these people play a very important role in understanding the individual better. So it also, in depth, if you look at, you can work in clinical setting, which like all of us are doing right now. I'm in a clinical setting. So you can also have one wing as research, which you carry out with animals to understand a particular function and then translate it into humans. And also you in clinical setting, what you do is neuropsychological assessment, and you also work in many other clinical settings where anywhere. Even in general medicine today, neuropsychology is important because you know that diabetes mellitus or hypothyroidism or myocardial infarction has brain bases. They have cognitive deficits. So even in those settings, you will be able to assist the individual. What is the takeaway? So clinical neuropsychology is a study of brain and behavior. It is a specialization under the umbrella of clinical psychology, which is dedicated to in understanding the relationship between brain and behavior. And it is you need to have a specialized knowledge in the field and requires expertise in the area that is based on the ways of behavior and skills, which is related to brain structure and system. I would like to add again, another important, you should know the neuroanatomy at your fingertip and the problems as addressed. What we do is, as I told you, from range of testing, including all the cognitive domains as well as behavior, wherever the clinical psychology is implicated, you step in as a clinical psychologist, but you also do the and integrate neuropsychology into the clinical psychology umbrella. And you also need to be very, very clear which is the population that you're serving. So based on that, you need to tailor make your assessment and rehabilitation. So if you look at, you can start from developmental to adult and even adolescent and geriatric. You work on social challenges in adulthood concerns can be addressed. And some of the conditions neuropsychologists routinely deal is with developmental disorders like autism, learning, and you know today all these are in rise. Everywhere you see autism, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, cancer, stroke, dementia, everything is in rise today. So the need for a clinical neuropsychologist in this country is huge. So the youngsters who are there, kindly think of pursuing your career in this and choose the right path, get qualified, because there is the law of the land which says that you should be a MPhil in clinical psychology to call yourself a clinical neuropsychology. Thank you all. Thank you for your kind attention, and any questions I will be more than happy to answer. Thank you. I hope I have crossed the time. Sorry. Any questions? Is there anything in the chat box?
Hannah, could you please inquire about the question answers?
So now it's time for question answer session. I would kindly request everyone to put up your doubts and clarifications in the chat box such that ma'am could address to your queries. Hello, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
So, ma'am, one of the question was, how can one pursue neuropsychology abroad?
Abroad.
Yeah.
See what each country has its own regulations. To call a clinical psychologist again in any country, you will have to have a basic qualification of clinical psychology and then pursue neuropsychology. Especially, there is another important thing that I need to inform all the participants. There is a course in UK which gives clinical neuropsychology, masters in clinical neuropsychology for 1 year. Kindly do not get carried away by it, because once you may pay a huge fee and get into the course, that course is not recognized in India, neither in UK. You may have a degree in neuropsychology, but they don't allow you to practice. So get your homework done properly, because each country has its own regulations. In US, you have to be a clinical psychologist to call yourself a neuropsychologist. In Australia, again, you have to be qualified clinical psychologist to call and specialized in neuropsychology. So they have this some of the exit exams that you need to take and then become a neuropsychologist.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is, like, what is the scope of neuropsychology in India?
I told you, as neuropsychology is in every walk of life, and it also assesses how you act, react, interact. All this is very, very important. So if you have the skill, you can fit into any kind of an organization, right from hospital, clinics, IT industry, juvenile prisons, juvenile homes, anywhere, if you just have, because cognition plays a very important role. Along with cognition, emotion and behavior also contributes to the individual's activities of daily living. So you can fit in any of these organizations. Right now, we are a handful of neuropsychologists in this country, and there is a dearth of neuropsychologists in this country. The way to go about is get qualified. That is very important. The minute you're qualified, there's nobody to question you. Today, we know that simply people call themselves neuropsychologists without any training, without any degree. And recently, I just saw in the news, a lady with a fake PhD was practicing clinical psychology. So kindly qualify yourself. If you want to pursue neuropsychology, you have to finish MPhil clinical psychology in any of the Rehabilitation Council of India's recognized institutions.
Okay, ma'am. So the next question is it necessary to do masters in clinical psychology to become a neuropsychologist?
Yes. MPhil in clinical psychology.
Okay.
Masters you can do anywhere. You can do in clinical psychology and get into, because there are 44 institutions offering clinical psychology in this country. So you can get into any of these institutions and qualify yourself as MPhil in clinical psychology, and then specialize in neuropsychology. Neuropsychology, as on date, NIMHANS is the only institution which is offering structured training, but I'm sure there will be many other institutions which will be offering, because they don't have the faculty to teach in such institutions. So right now, NIMHANS is the only institution. So we are offering 1 year of fellowship in clinical neuropsychology.
Okay, ma'am. So for clarification, the one question that I have raised is, to become a neuropsychologist just under the supervision of a neuropsychologist without doing a PhD, would that be equal?
Yes, yes. That is, you should have 3 to 5 years after your MPhil.
So next question is, will neuropsychologists be restricted treating to specific domains, only like autism and dementia?
No. Anything, wherever brain is implicated, neuropsychologist is there. And I can also tell you, neuropsychologists will exist with any advanced imaging also coming in the in future, because neuropsychologists carries out the assessment in a natural setting, and it is done one-to-one. So you understand the patient's behavior while you're doing the assessment. patient's emotion while you're doing the assessment. So neuropsychologists will exist, whatever the advanced imaging techniques that can come about.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you for the information. The next question is, psychologists are not qualified to administer drugs and medical treatment. Can neuropsychologists do medical treatment or only on medical diagnosis?
No. One thing you should understand, medication is a separate domain where you have to be a basic MBBS. Otherwise, we are not allowed to do. Though in US, and clinical psychologists administer for anxiety and depression, but in India, we don't do it and refrain from doing it because you will get into trouble.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you for the information. Next question is, can we do PsyD instead of PhD for becoming neuropsychologist in India?
I would see the PsyD is not recognized. So though RCI recognizes it, but the in-depth knowledge, if you want to have in a specialized area, do a PhD in that specialized area. My advice to you all is that.
Okay. So ma'am, the next question is it possible to get the fellowship in neuropsychology after completing MSc in psychology?
Yes, again, there is an entrance exam. There are 2 seats which institute sponsors and 2 payment seats where you pay a fee and get in. So there is an entrance test every year. You can look at the NIMHANS website. For after MPhil, you can come for 1 year. Specialized training you will get in neuropsychology.
Okay, ma'am. So the many queries have come up regarding, is that like, do we need a science background for this career or like?
Not really. Though I come from a science background, but not really. There are many people, I'm sure there are in the crowd itself, some of the faculties who are going to address you, their all background will be arts, but still you can do it. It is a doable subject, but a lot of hard work has to be put in and your understanding has to be very, very clear and you should have supervised training. Yes, I agree. In clinical psychology, neuropsychology is one of the most difficult subjects, but it is a doable subject.
Okay, ma'am. So the next and the final question would be, what are the research methodologies used in neuropsychology? And is there any contradictory analysis in reference to general medicine?
I didn't get the question. So first part of the question is?
Research methodologies used in neuropsychology.
As you use in any other psychology, in clinical psychology, the same research methodology. You can carry out a prospective study, randomized control study, any kind of a study based on what is the population and what is the implication that it has carrying out this study.
Okay, ma'am. So the next combined question was that, is there any contradictory analysis in reference to general medicine?
Contradictory in general medicine? No, it cannot. See, one thing you should understand is, while doing a neuropsychological assessment or rehabilitation, you're only addressing a particular structure or a particular function to improve that function. So there is no contraindication in any of this. I understand you must be asking in terms of whether there is the biofeedback or the neurofeedback that you're giving in individual. So no, there's no contraindication in any general medicine.